Unconventional Ministry podcast, where we explore creative, courageous, and sometimes unexpected ways Christians are advancing the gospel around the world. What if your ministry's biggest problem isn't your mission, but your inability to communicate that mission clearly? You have a compelling vision. You may have incredible work. You may be changing lives, but if people don't understand who you are, why your work matters, and how they can be a part of it, even the best mission can struggle to gain momentum. My guests are Larry and Richard Ross of And Associates, formerly A. Larry Ross Communications, who help ministries and nonprofits clarify who they are, what they want to say, and how they present that message to the world. They have a new generation of organizations align their message, strategy, identity, and public presence, so a great vision doesn't just get communicated. That vision gets understood, remembered, and moves people to action. So how do you know if your ministry's message is actually connecting? And how do you communicate a timeless mission in a rapidly changing world? Let's find out. And I want to welcome my guests, Larry Ross and his son, Richard Ross, to the Unconventional Ministry podcast. So welcome both of you to this interesting discussion we're going to have.
Hi, Dennis. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, thank you for coming on. And, the Larry Ross Communication has quite a reputation out there. And so I'm honored to have you on, as well as your son, who's come onto the team and moving the whole organization maybe in a new direction with all the new technology taking place. So, Richard, glad to have you on as well.
Great to be on here, Dennis. Thank you so much for having us.
So before we begin, I just want to say, not only are we grateful for this opportunity, but I just want to say, equally important, how much we appreciate the opportunity to serve as communications partners with you and the SAT7 team and the vital work that you do in proclaiming the gospel throughout the Middle East and sharing God's love with people in the epicenter and also Northern Africa. And we're just grateful to be communications partners with you. And my mantra for my whole career, and I've now been a PR guy for over 50 years, the last 40 of which have been at the threshold of faith and culture, providing crossover communications out of the church into the mainstream and vice versa. But our calling is to lift up the arms of men and women of God, people who are working for God and the common good, and to help to increase their influence and extend the impact of their organization to and through the media. I was never called to preach, but I believe what we do is every bit as much ministry in increasing the effectiveness and the reach of these organizations. So we serve as a kingdom outpost, and my mantra has been to suit up and show up, and lift up the name of Jesus, and let God do the rest. And He's been faithful, and so it's exciting to have a professional involvement in ministry in that way.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it reminds me of the story. A few years ago, you came by the SAT7 booth at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and we had a discussion. And then Dr. Terrence Ascott, the founder of SAT7, was there with me. And I got busy talking to somebody else, and you and Dr. Ascott were visiting. I looked back over there and saw that you two were praying, and here the busyness of NRB exhibit hall and all the busyness. Here, two CEOs were praying together, and I was really impressed. And I know you did our SAT7 press releases, the last NRB, so appreciate the partnership. And for our podcast listeners, let's start, Larry, with you. And when we talk about public relations, I think we all know PR, but let's define and you just did a little bit of it, for our podcast listeners, what we're going to be talking about. What is PR in ministry and in churches? Just define that for us.
Sure. Well, and it may be counterintuitive for some people. Why do churches and ministries need public relations? It's really about leveraging the power of story and projecting. We're not talking about manufacturing an image. We're talking about projecting an identity that exists so that people understand who you are, what you're about, rather than being pejoratively defined by others who may perhaps have an agenda. Often when we start working with an organization, we ask three questions. Who are you? What do you do? Secondly, how are you perceived? It may be that you're a well-kept secret, or if there's a misperception, in who you are and what you do. Then the third question is, what's the difference? And that is the communication gap that needs to be filled. And we can do that in a variety of ways. Sometimes I did a seminar recently, get me into the news, get me out of the news. Sometimes we have organizations come to us and say, help me promote what we're doing, publicize what we're doing. Others are saying, I'm in a crisis. I want to get out of the news. And so it works both ways. And so we prayerfully work with them. And it really is, as I say, a ministry and a calling. And someone once asked my wife, who do you represent? And she said, anyone we're with in heaven one day, we'll be with in heaven. And at first it didn't make sense, but I realized that's brilliant, because we feel like if someone is faithful to God's calling on their life and the organization, even if it's not something I can relate to, as long as it's not unethical, heretical, illegal, or immoral, then if there's a media component, we feel duty bound to help them. And so that's what we do, is we just suit up and show up, and then, as I say, let God do the rest.
And in 40 years, you've worked with 70 or so number of Billy Graham crusades. You've worked with the Purpose-Driven Life and Rick Warren and the Passion of the Christ and many others. So you've really, in those 40 years, impacted a lot. Richard, let's go to you. Organizations bring their message, strategy, identity, and public presence into alignment. And you talk about that, but let's unpack that word alignment for ministries, our podcast listeners. Some are pastors, some are nonprofits. What is that word alignment? What does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dennis. When I think about alignment, it really is wherever someone encounters you, is it aligned with the core truth and essence of who you are and who your brand is? And I think we're blessed to be able to work with people who have been called by God, who have put a message on their heart that they have been heeded to go and share that message. So the truth is connected to the truth. And there's a way that can be sensed across the whole ecosystem of a brand, of a ministry, of an organization. And so when you land on your website, how is that coming forward? When you land on your social accounts, how is that coming forward and being represented? And is it all in alignment with each other, so that what you're trying to communicate, this message that God has put on you, is it coming forward in the way that is appropriate for each of those channels? That's really where I think that the most effective brands and organizations really come forward, is because you are encountering the essence of what it is all about for that organization in each place that you land as a part of that ecosystem.
So for our podcast listeners, I know we got some pastors listening. What are the first signs of misalignment? Just give some clues so somebody listening could recognize maybe they're out of alignment.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times people will put, in general, I think I see people having kind of the top line elements of their mission on the homepage of their website in some way, whether that's immediately there or down the page. I think folks really try to, particularly in a ministry context, get that ministry, the mission out there. But sometimes when you're on their Instagram or their YouTube or another area, which oftentimes can be the primary points of communication for an organization these days, the same essence or the feeling of what is trying to be put forward isn't necessarily coming across, and I'm not walking away with an understanding of what the organization is trying to do. Oftentimes I see folks trying to explain what they're up to rather than demonstrate through feeling. My background is in brand building. I've worked in the marketplace and learned a lot about how the most effective brands happen. And a lot of times it's working so that this alignment we're talking about, that the totality of the experience results in a feeling of the participant, of the viewer, of the customer, to where the feeling of the message is coming forward. And that often, when you can kind of get into the heart more so than the head alone, is what can stay with someone and create that impact. And sometimes it's fractured across the ecosystem. An organization will do it better in one area, but they haven't quite figured out how to have that transfer over into the 2, 3, 4, 5 other areas that people are encountering organizations, even for the first time today.
And Dennis, I would add, we would do a lot of work with Christian higher education, Christian colleges and universities, and I've learned a word that's an industry word in education, and that's outcomes. When the president of a college or university, Christian school, is approached by a prospective parent, they say, well, why should I send my student to Wheaton or Taylor and not an Ivy League school? And they talk about the outcomes, the non-academic benefits of, 10 years from now, they're more likely to be in church or married or whatever. And I think that those outcomes for many ministries can be in demonstrating the transformational impact, the human interest stories of people whose lives have been changed by the work they do, helping to show, as Richard said, not just telling what we do, but showing that through the testimonies of some of these people. You mentioned Rick Warren and Billy Graham. Both men are faithful to God's calling on their lives. I would say the difference between the two, Billy Graham preached a timeless message. Rick Warren preached a timely message, the same timeless message, but he would often put the gospel in a cultural context. If he was talking to a group of CEOs, he would say, not the Lord is my shepherd, but the Lord is my CEO. And he would speak in vernacular that they can understand. And similarly, when we work with clients, we try to, and we represent them like SAT7, we try to go to reporters, a lot of secular reporters, emphasizing news hooks and message points that don't require a reporter to be of like-minded faith. If we're dealing with a Christian radio outlet or publication, then we can, of course, feather in a lot of the parochial message points. But I believe it's just knowing who your audience is and what you want to convey with them in a language that they understand.
I know on your website you have a phrase, there is a version of your work people feel immediately. And that really caught my attention because I think a lot of times, you visit a church website or ministry website, you don't feel their work or their vision right away. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. And that, I think, is one of the biggest differences of today, is that often before any words are even processed or read, it is the way that it looks and it feels. And I think that's one of the biggest difference of, when we think about communications, the visuals are what's communicating even before the words today. The way that the environment is set up is giving cues to a visitor, to a viewer, to a donor, that they're in the right place. And one can orient themselves or feel disoriented very quickly. And that's where I was saying that with ministries, a lot of times there's an explanation that's being put forward, but there can be a sea of words that can get in the way of, if you were to distill it down into something very simple and very accessible and arrange it in a way that could just land with the impact that it's kind of like when God speaks to our heart, he doesn't dump like the fullness of it on us. He gives us a piece of it that is so robust and intriguing and impactful, and we sit with it and we unpack it over time. And I think that there's an element of that device of God that we can put forward into our work. Trust that it is, if you're able to distill it down, the totality will be imbued with what God has implanted into the founder, into what's then now spread to the team and the organization. And there can be a work that can happen in almost the mystery of the message, because it's something that has to be understood over time, and allowing for that process of folks encountering you here and knowing that, okay, this, on the website, this is the part of the feeling that's coming forward. And today, people interact with websites rather differently and all that stuff. But I know often for me and a lot of folks that I work with, you'll land on the website, you'll kind of take it in, but then you go down to find their social links to really understand the validation of, okay, are they following through? Is this something that is really something worth following and tracking with? And that, again, that's that alignment thing. You can start to explore multiple aspects of an ecosystem pretty quickly and find how well someone is tending to the myriad of gardens in a brand.
Hey, Gus, I would add, Richard has been articulating how much communications has changed in the 40 years since I started working at this threshold of faith and culture. But I think we have to recognize so has culture. When I started, we were the home team. We're no longer the home team. We're the visiting team, and we're getting booed. In fact, sometimes it's kind of disheartening to see the referee coming down the court, dribbling the ball, helping the other team. And so we have to change how we approach culture. And it's the organizations that are able to state who they are and what they do in terms of mission, that are able to operate within the law and really are able to be effective. And I know that an example, I was thinking about this last night. When I was a kid, I was a knucklehead as a kid, and every Thanksgiving we would go downtown Chicago with my mom, and we'd go shopping. And my two brothers and I, when the light would change on State Street, we'd get in the middle of the intersection, this mass of people Christmas shopping, and we'd stop and we'd point up, and we'd wait till there's a crowd of like 100 people looking up, trying to see what's going on, and we'd walk away, and then the light would change, and everybody was honking, and we would just stand there laughing because it was just caused chaos, and nobody knew what was going on. Well, the application is, in this din of information that we're all bombarded with every day, the way that you can get people to understand and I kind of stand out from the crowd is point people to Jesus, and make the main thing, and not get lost in all these other things. And I think God will honor the faithfulness of that.
Yeah, good point. And how you operated 40 years ago and how you would operate today is vastly different. Absolutely. So let's move the conversation now. A lot of people probably think they don't need a PR firm, they don't need help. So you work with a lot of organizations. What are some mistakes you see organizations make? Just to help give our podcast listeners, maybe they do need a PR firm more than they realize. So what are some mistakes people should look for?
One thing that I've noticed, that people come to us and they say, all right, we want to get in the news. And we say, okay, great, let's take a look. And we look at what they have, and they're not yet ready to receive outsized attention. Their environment isn't ready to, if I use a marketing term, convert. They don't have the mechanisms available to, if you get a ton of attention, let's say a website is used to, 25 visitors a week, and you do a news story that really lands, and then all of a sudden you have 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, however many people that are coming on there. Well, the biggest thing is to make sure that you have an intentional way to bring people into what you have worked so hard to get the attention toward. Otherwise, some of that attention can often be just a bit of, it can vaporize. And so that's often what we see. We help folks come forward and say, well, we understand that you'd like to get this attention, but we want to be able to help you totally be prepared to receive it. Something I've been thinking about recently is when people think of I've been thinking about the word media. And I think that the default understanding of what that word is the news. But media is the plural of medium, and the news and those types of outlets is one medium that a message can travel through. But the mediums that a message can move through have started to kind of propagate out. And so while the news placements are really, really beneficial, if it's not coupled with a strategy on how to handle it on the organic side, and what I mean by that is through your social networks like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, which if you can operate in those environments effectively, sort of like play the game that the algorithm would respond well to, there can be outsized organic traffic that can come from that, comparable to what folks have really kind of learned PR to do with the news media. And so if you can play the whole landscape and understand how you're strategically moving your message throughout these areas. See, if you get a big pop, again, one way that people are going to come to validate the organization can be through their social medias. But if the social media doesn't have something prepared for people to engage with and be like, wow, I didn't even know this was here. This is amazing. Let me follow. Let me follow along. Or, oh, I've landed on their website and I now have an effective way to submit my email. Of course I want to do this because I'm interested with the story that I saw. Then you're able to have them stay with you and learn more about you over time. Kind of how we were talking about how these messages unfold as someone spends time with you and your organization, and the democratization of being able to be almost like a self-publisher and aggregate an audience, which folks relied on kind of the news media institutions to access their audiences. The way that one can access a multitude of people is much more diversified today. And so having an awareness that of having these strategies across the board will have the greatest effectiveness of the message moving.
Dennis,
well, very good. Yes, Larry.
Yes, I really appreciate what Richard just unpacked there. And I would add, having observed a lot of these ministries over decades, one of the things I learned from Mr. Graham is that the principles, and I would encourage any ministry leader to think about this, the principles of evangelism never change, or ministry, but the methods often do. As you know, Dennis, with SAT7, depending on the country or the culture, some of the countries in which you broadcast, you have to do so differently because they're somewhat closed to the gospel. And yet, for Mr. Graham, for example, the principle was he never held the crusade unless he was invited, and only accepted when he was assured of a broad representation of all the churches in an area. Secondly, I think, and this may sound trite because of the book that Rick Warren wrote, but I would encourage organizations to remain purpose-driven and true to their calling as an organization. I don't know if you know the movie City Slickers, but Curly, this ranch hand in Colorado, tells this type A workaholic guy, Mitch, that the secret to life is one thing. And he said, well, what is that one thing? That's for you to find out. But the Apostle Paul tells us that it's to basically to love God and love others, and love God and let love happen. And I think that if organizations can avoid mission drift, mission shift, and stay focused on what they're called to do, God will honor that. Thirdly, I was blessed years ago, 2012, to attend Chuck Colson's memorial at the National Cathedral, and he was eulogized by Governor Al Quie. I think he was his former board chair, former Minnesota governor. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, truth without grace can be debilitating, but grace without truth can be deceptive. One is legalism, the other is license. And he said Chuck Colson had a proper balance of grace and truth, and that's why we honor him today. And I think that's the challenge for any organization today in our culture that is already combusted, is to balance grace and truth in the work that we do. I would also recommend or suggest, encourage leaders to consider thought leadership. Rick Warren was a late adopter to Twitter because he said, remember the early prompt was, what are you doing today? He said, nobody cares what I'm doing. Nobody cared what I had for lunch. But when he realized it could be an opportunity to say what he's thinking, then he said, okay, I'm in. So I would say servant leadership is important, but so is servant thinkmanship, and trying to encourage others what you're thinking and where they should be focusing. And the last thing I would say, and this has been a personal challenge for me, I thought this might come up, and so I pulled an article. Roger Rosenblatt, one of my favorite writers, he's long since passed, from Time magazine, always wrote every issue a back page essay. And one of his essays years ago was called What Matters Most. I'm going to read two paragraphs, if I may, if we have time.
Sure, go ahead.
He said that, see, where is it? I grabbed the wrong page here. He said, journalists put the question in practical terms. What should we lead with? We've just been talking at PR. The rest of the population asks more generally, what matters most? They come to the same puzzle. Survey events in a given period of time and try to come up with the single moment, the headline by which the world may be characterized, stopped in its spin. What should we lead with? What matters most? What we confront in making such choices is not the events alone, but ourselves. And it's ourselves that we're not able to place in order. The question is not what the press decrees is this week's news. The question is us. What should we lead with? What matters most? And for me, that's been a lifelong struggle. Been a performance orientation my whole life, and often valued for what I did rather than who I was. Striving for significance in my career early on, and measured by the events I was involved in or the people I represented. And I've realized that the gospel is a person, it's Jesus. Lifting up Jesus is the most important thing. And I imagine, Dennis, your audience has many people of faith, but there may be people here who are listening who don't know the Lord, who don't have a purpose to their lives. And I would just encourage them, more important than anything we've talked about today, is to consider the truths of Jesus and how that would apply to your life. And so I think that while organizations want to remain purpose-driven, focus on their calling, they also need to remember that what matters most is us in helping people confront the big question about what to do with Jesus in their lives.
Amen. And you've both of you have given our podcast listeners a lot to think about. Where's the website so they can go learn more? They can get in contact with your organization if they realize now they may need some help.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can visit our website. We're now And Associates, which is and-associates.com. Check it out, and you can send us an email. We'd love to connect with you and hear about your ministry and organization. I think that's our favorite thing to do, is to be able to have those initial calls and hear what people are facing and help provide those solutions to become more effective with their message. And oftentimes it's different than what folks think initially. I think the best part is that we get to do it in collaboration with the Holy Spirit. I mean, there are things that come forward in this work that are not from us. They are out of the giftings and the anointings and appointments that He has placed on this organization and our position in the kingdom of God. And we're just very grateful to be able to serve the body in this capacity.
Well, thank you. And our time's up, but appreciate all that you've done for ministries over these many years, and appreciate the work that you've done for helping Sat7 become better known. And of course, that impacts how we broadcast the gospel across the Middle East and North Africa. So again, thank you for coming on. Any last words, Larry or Richard, for our podcast listeners?
I'll just say check the website, because if you scroll down, there's a timeline of the organization, and that's a good overview of the legend that is A. Larry Ross. He is a legend in Christendom, I would say, and it's a blessing to be able to follow in his footsteps. And there's a good little story there.
Okay, we'll look forward to that story. And Larry, any closing thoughts? I'm sure you have some.
I would just say, remember that Jesus was never in a hurry, but He was always on time. And I've had FOMO my whole life, fear of missing out. Jesus didn't have to be where things were happening. He just made things happen where He was. He didn't tell His disciples to try harder. He told them to think differently. And I think that that's a challenge for all of us. And, one of the things that you had mentioned you wanted to talk about, we didn't have time, maybe we could have another full discussion on this, is AI and how that's changed everything. I know that there's a lot of people in the church that are very afraid of AI. I have been personally mentored in the last 6 months by a gentleman who's been in AI since 1990. Helped me understand that AI is not about data. It's not just a better, faster search engine. It's about language. And as a lifelong wordsmith, that's in my wheelhouse. It recognizes language fingerprints. That's awesome. And so I think just as Al Gore did not invent the internet for pornography, I'm being facetious for you younger listeners here. AI, yes, there's an underbelly to it, but I believe it's a tool that can be leveraged in a powerful way for the gospel. And so maybe we can have another discussion at some point on that, Dennis.
Yeah, we'll look forward to having another episode of the podcast focused on AI and new technology. So thank you again for joining us. Until next time, I'm Dennis Weens, and this has been the Unconventional Ministry Podcast. Stay bold, stay creative, and keep advancing the gospel in unconventional ways.
Thanks, Dennis. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you each.